My name is Eleanor Bennett, and at 62 years old, I never thought I'd be standing in a courtroom testifying against my own son-in-law's family. The Morgans always seemed like decent people until that day at Lake Winnipesaukee when they deliberately pushed my daughter Katherine into the water, knowing full well she couldn't swim. They laughed as she thrashed and screamed for help, calling it just a harmless prank. They had no idea my brother Robert was a retired federal judge with connections that would tear their perfect family facade to shreds and expose every skeleton in their closet. Before I dive deeper into this family drama that changed our lives forever, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. Hever sen. It always amazes me how our stories connect people from all over. If this kind of family justice resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up to toxic family dynamics. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. I've been a widow for 5 years now. My husband Thomas passed away from a heart attack, leaving me to finish raising our 2 children alone, though they were adults by then. Katherine, my daughter, is 32 and my son James is 35. I've always been proud of both of them, but Katherine in particular has always been special to me. She's brilliant, graduated top of her class in law school, and now works as an environmental lawyer in Boston. She's always been passionate about protecting the planet, even as a little girl. What most people don't know about Katherine is that she has a deep-seated fear of water. When she was 8, she nearly drowned at a friend's pool party. A bigger kid had pushed her into the deep end as a joke, not realizing she couldn't swim. By the time they pulled her out, she'd been unconscious. The doctors said she was lucky, but the trauma stayed with her. Despite years of therapy, she's never been comfortable around large bodies of water, especially lakes and oceans. She can manage a swimming pool if she stays in the shallow end, but anything deeper sends her into a panic. I remember the day she brought Michael Morgan home. They'd met at an environmental charity gala where his family was a major donor. Michael was 34, classically handsome with that polished look that comes from generations of old money. The Morgans are Connecticut aristocracy, with a family business in investment banking dating back nearly a century. Gerald Morgan, Michael's father, is the patriarch, a stern, imposing man who rules his family like a business. Victoria, his wife, is the quintessential old-money socialite, perfectly coiffed, impeccably mannered, but with eyes that never warm when she smiles. They have 3 children, Elizabeth, the eldest at 36, Michael in the middle, and Andrew, the youngest at 30. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Within 6 months of meeting, they were engaged, and 3 months later, they were married in what the society pages called the wedding of the season. I had my concerns about the speed of it all, but Katherine seemed happy, even if I noticed small warning signs. The condescending way Victoria looked at Katherine's modest engagement ring before Michael upgraded it. The subtle corrections Michael would make to Katherine's table manners. The way the entire Morgan family referred to Katherine's environmental law work as her little cause. Our family has always been close-knit, especially since Thomas died. My brother Robert has been like a second father to my children. At 68, he's retired now, but he spent his career as a federal judge, known for his fairness and integrity. He's always been my rock, especially during the tough times. The children adore him. He's the one who helped pay for Katherine's law school, who taught James how to fish, who never missed a birthday or graduation. After the wedding, I started seeing less and less of Katherine. The visits became fewer, the phone calls shorter, and always when Michael wasn't around. When we did see each other, I noticed changes in her. My confident, outspoken daughter became anxious, constantly checking her phone as if afraid of missing a message from Michael. She dressed differently too, more conservative, more expensive, but somehow less like herself. Her easy laugh was replaced with a careful smile. Then came the subtle put-downs I'd witnessed from Michael. "Katherine's still learning about wine," he'd say with a condescending smile when she'd order at a restaurant. "She gets so emotional about these environmental issues," he'd tell others, patting her hand as if she were a child. "We're working on her social graces," he once told his mother right in front of me, while Katherine stared at her plate. Last month, we received an invitation to the annual Morgan family gathering at their Lake Winnipesaukee estate in New Hampshire. It's apparently a tradition going back generations, a week-long affair at their sprawling lakefront property. Katherine called me, sounding strained, asking if I would come along. "It would be easier with you there, Mom," she said. I later learned she had begged Michael to include me, and he had reluctantly agreed as a courtesy. I accepted immediately. Something in her voice worried me, a tension I hadn't heard before. Plus, I wanted to see firsthand how the Morgans treated my daughter behind closed doors. I had a feeling the tension between their old money expectations and our middle-class background was creating problems for Katherine, and I needed to know how bad it really was. What I didn't know then was that I was about to witness the true face of the Morgan family, and that by the end of that week, nothing would ever be the same again. The Morgan estate on Lake Winnipesaukee took my breath away when we first arrived. The main house was a sprawling colonial masterpiece with at least 10 bedrooms, sitting on several acres of manicured lakefront property. A private dock extended into the crystal-clear water, with several boats moored alongside. Stone pathways wound through gardens that must have required a team of full-time gardeners to maintain. It was beautiful but intimidating, exactly like the family that owned it. Victoria Morgan greeted us at the door with an air kiss that didn't come within 6 inches of Katherine's cheek. "Katherine, darling," she said, her voice as cool as the gin and tonic in her hand. "And, Eleanor, is it? How lovely that you could join us." The way she said it made it clear that it was anything but lovely. Michael took our bags upstairs, while Victoria gave us what she called the standard tour, which seemed designed primarily to impress upon me the value and history of every item in the house. "This painting is a Sargent, one of his early works. This silver service was a gift from a Roosevelt. These china patterns have been in the family for 6 generations. On and on it went. Each item a reminder that the Morgans existed in a different world than the one I'd raised my children in. Throughout the day, more family members arrived. Elizabeth and her husband Thomas, who everyone called Tommy, apparently to distinguish him from actual Morgans. Andrew and his third wife Simone, cousins and aunts and uncles whose names blurred together. I quickly noticed a pattern. The Blood Morgans were loud, confident, borderline arrogant, while those who had married into the family were quieter, more careful with their words, constantly looking to their spouses for cues on how to behave. Katherine was almost unrecognizable among them. My bright, passionate daughter moved like a shadow, her voice rarely rising above a murmur. She stayed close to Michael, who himself seemed to transform in the presence of his family. The charming, considerate man I'd met was replaced by someone more arrogant, more dismissive, especially of Katherine. He interrupted her regularly, corrected her stories, and at one point physically moved her aside when she was speaking with his uncle about environmental law, saying, "Uncle Charles doesn't want to hear about industrial waste at a family gathering, darling." Dinner that first night was an elaborate affair served by staff in a formal dining room that could have hosted a state dinner. Gerald Morgan sat at the head of the table, Victoria at the foot, with the rest of us arranged in what was clearly a predetermined hierarchy. Katherine and I were seated near the bottom, far from Michael, who sat near his father. The conversation flowed around us, rarely including either of us except when Gerald raised his glass for a toast. "To family," he said, looking around the table, "and to those less fortunate whom we've welcomed into our fold." Several eyes flicked toward Katherine and me, and I felt my daughter stiffen beside me. Victoria wasn't much better. "Katherine, dear," she said during dessert, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "when are you planning to take a break from your little job and provide us with some grandchildren? The Morgan line must continue, you know." Katherine blushed deeply. "We're not ready for children yet, Victoria," she said softly. "Not ready?" Victoria laughed lightly. "Michael was conceived within 3 months of our wedding. It's a wife's duty, particularly in a family like ours." After dinner, I pulled Katherine aside, finding a moment when Michael was engaged in conversation with his father about business. "Are you all right?" I asked, noticing the tension around her eyes. "I'm fine, Mom," she said automatically. Then, seeing my expression, her shoulders slumped slightly. "It's just difficult sometimes. The Morgans have their ways, their traditions. Michael says I'll get used to it." "Do you want to get used to it?" I asked carefully. "The way they speak to you, the way they treat you? It doesn't seem right, Katherine." She bit her lip. "It's been hard," she admitted. "But they're Michael's family. This is just how they are. It's different when we're alone." I wasn't convinced, but before I could press further, Michael appeared, placing a possessive hand on Katherine's waist. "Mother's looking for you," he told her, not acknowledging my presence. Something about the breakfast menu. As Katherine walked away, I made a quick call to my brother Robert. "Just checking in," I told him, keeping my voice low. "The Morgan family is not what I expected." "Trust your instincts, Ellie," he said, using the nickname only he called me, "and call me anytime if you need me." That night, as I was returning from the bathroom, I overheard Michael speaking with Elizabeth and Andrew in the library, the door slightly ajar. "She's going to have to pass the test tomorrow," Elizabeth was saying. "Mother's already questioning whether she has the backbone to be a Morgan." "She'll do it," Michael said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "She has to. Remember what happened with Tommy's first wife?" Andrew laughed. "She packed her bags that same night." "Katherine is different," Michael insisted. "We'll see," Elizabeth replied. "The test never fails to reveal who truly belongs and who doesn't." I retreated to my room, a sense of foreboding settling in my stomach. What test were they talking about? And what did it have to do with tomorrow's activities? I tried to sleep, but the unfamiliar bed and my growing concern for Katherine kept me awake most of the night. The next morning dawned bright and clear, perfect lake weather, as Gerald announced over breakfast. The day's activities would include tennis on the family courts, a luncheon on the terrace, and various lake activities in the afternoon. The way the family exchanged glances at the mention of the latter sent a chill down my spine. I watched Victoria throughout the morning, noting how differently she treated various family members. Blood Morgans received warmth, attention, and praise, while in-laws were treated with a cool politeness at best, outright dismissal at worst. Katherine received the worst of it. Victoria seemed to go out of her way to exclude my daughter from conversations, to position her outside of family photos, to speak about her in the third person even when she was present. The family dynamics were becoming clearer to me by the hour. The Morgans operated like a small monarchy, with Gerald and Victoria as king and queen, their children as princes and princesses, and everyone else as subjects expected to show proper deference. They had strange competitive rituals, too. Everything from tennis matches to card games became intense competitions with the losers subjected to subtle but unmistakable mockery. I noticed Andrew openly flirting with a young woman serving drinks, despite Simone standing just feet away, pretending not to notice. Later, I overheard him boasting to a cousin about a weekend in Montreal that his wife clearly knew nothing about. Elizabeth was no better. I witnessed her berating her husband Tommy for spilling a drop of wine on the terrace tiles, calling him incompetent and embarrassing while the family looked on, some hiding smirks behind their napkins. Over lunch, Gerald held court, telling family stories that revealed a disturbing pattern. Many involved what they called practical jokes that sounded cruel at best, sadistic at worst. One involved sending a new in-law on a snipe hunt in the woods that lasted until 3 a.m. Another detailed how they convinced a cousin's fiancé that the engagement was off as a test of her devotion. The family laughed uproariously while I sat in stunned silence, Katherine poking at her salad beside me. "Family loyalty is everything," Gerald pronounced, raising his glass. "The Morgans stick together, no matter what. We've built what we have by presenting a united front to the world, and that's how we'll maintain it for generations to come." As lunch concluded, conversation turned to the afternoon's activities. "The annual Morgan swimming competition is a tradition going back to my grandfather's time," Gerald announced. "And of course, we have our special tradition for newer family members." Again, those knowing looks passed between the Blood Morgans. Katherine pulled me aside as people began to disperse. "Mom, I'm worried about this swimming thing," she whispered. "You know how I am with water, especially lakes. Can't you sit it out?" I asked Michael last night, but he said everyone participates. It's a major tradition. He said I'd be fine, that he wouldn't let anything happen to me. She didn't sound convinced, and neither was I. I watched as Katherine approached Michael again, speaking quietly but intently. His face hardened, and he shook his head firmly. "Everyone participates. Katherine, don't embarrass me in front of my family." As the afternoon wore on, Katherine's anxiety became increasingly visible. She was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she changed into the swimsuit Michael had laid out for her, a designer piece that looked more suitable for a fashion shoot than actual swimming. I found her in the bathroom an hour before the boat was scheduled to depart, her eyes red from crying. "I can't do this, Mom," she confessed, her voice breaking. "I'm terrified, but I'm more afraid of what will happen if I refuse." "What do you mean?" I asked, alarmed. "What would Michael do?" She hesitated. Then the dam broke. "It's not just the swimming. It's everything. Michael controls all our finances. I don't even have access to my own paycheck. He checks my phone, monitors my emails. He's isolated me from most of my friends, saying they weren't suitable. When I disagree with him, he can get scary. Not physically, but the way he looks at me, the things he says. And his family is 1,000 times worse. Katherine, we need to leave, I said firmly. Now, today. She shook her head frantically. I can't. He would make my life hell. You don't understand what the Morgans can do when they turn on someone. I tried to speak with Michael, catching him alone in the hallway. Michael, Katherine isn't comfortable with the swimming activities. You know about her phobia. Can't you make an exception? He looked at me with cold eyes I'd never seen before. Mrs. Bennet, with all due respect, this is a family matter. Katherine is a Morgan now, and Morgans participate in family traditions. I suggest you focus on enjoying your stay as our guest and leave the rest to us. That evening, as everyone prepared for dinner, I overheard another conversation, this time between Gerald, Elizabeth, and Victoria. Tomorrow we'll separate the wheat from the chaff, Gerald was saying. It always does. I still don't think she has what it takes, Elizabeth replied. She's too soft, too emotional. Well, we'll find out, Victoria said. The tradition never fails to show us who truly belongs and who doesn't. I called Robert again that night, this time sharing my specific concerns. Something's going to happen tomorrow on the lake, and I'm worried about Katherine. She's terrified of water, and they all know it, but they're insisting she participate in some kind of tradition. Do you want me to come up there? He asked immediately. I can be there by noon tomorrow. I hesitated only briefly. Yes, I said. Please come. I don't know what they're planning, but I have a very bad feeling about it. I'll leave first thing in the morning, he promised. In the meantime, stay close to Katherine and call me if anything happens. I tried to sleep that night, but my mind kept replaying the conversations I'd overheard, the warning signs I'd seen. What exactly was this tradition that the Morgans were so insistent upon? And why did I feel like my daughter was in danger from the very people who should have welcomed her with open arms? The morning of the boat trip brought crystal clear skies and a tense atmosphere that hung over breakfast like a thundercloud. Katherine barely touched her food, her face pale and drawn. Michael, sitting beside her for once, kept urging her to eat, his solicitousness feeling forced and performative. Big day today, Gerald announced, standing at the head of the table. Perfect weather for our annual Morgan tradition. He looked directly at Katherine as he spoke, a smile on his face that didn't reach his eyes. Katherine, darling, I've laid out a life jacket for you, Victoria said sweetly. We wouldn't want any accidents. The way she emphasized the last word sent a shiver down my spine. As everyone prepared to head down to the dock, I stayed close to Katherine, who was visibly trembling as she pulled on a light cover-up over her swimsuit. I can't do this, Mom, she whispered, her voice breaking. I really can't. We'll stay together, I promised her. I won't let anything happen to you. Michael appeared, placing a proprietary hand on Katherine's shoulder. Ready, darling? Everyone's waiting. Michael, please, Katherine pleaded. You know how I feel about deep water. Couldn't I just watch from the boat? His expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into a smile that seemed practiced. Don't be silly, Katherine. It's just a bit of fun. Family tradition. I'll be right there with you the whole time. The lie was evident in his eyes. Gerald's boat was impressive, a large luxury craft with seating for at least 20 people. The family piled on, coolers of drinks and snacks being loaded by staff. I noticed several family members exchanging significant glances, a current of anticipation running through the group that made me increasingly uneasy. As the boat pulled away from the dock, Katherine gripped the railing with white knuckles, her eyes fixed on the shore as it receded. I stayed beside her, one hand on her back, trying to project a calmness I didn't feel. Michael had moved to the other side of the boat, deep in conversation with his siblings, occasionally glancing our way. The boat motored to the center of the lake, where the water was deepest. Gerald cut the engine, and the boat drifted gently on the still water. The beauty of the scene, mountains ringing the clear blue lake, the sky a perfect cloudless expanse above us, stood in stark contrast to the knot of dread in my stomach. Gerald stood up, drink in hand. As most of you know, the Morgan family has a tradition going back 3 generations. When someone new joins our family, they participate in a little initiation. He smiled broadly. It's how we welcome you truly into the fold, how we know you're one of us." Catherine's hand found mine and squeezed painfully tight. "The tradition is simple," Gerald continued. "A swim from the boat back to the dock, not terribly far, but far enough to prove your mettle. Every Morgan spouse has done it, some more gracefully than others. But I've told you all," Katherine said, her voice small but desperate. "I have a phobia. I nearly drowned as a child. I can barely swim." Victoria laughed lightly. "Darling, that's precisely the point. Overcoming one's fears is how character is built. Isn't that right, Michael?" Michael wouldn't meet Catherine's eyes. "It's tradition, Katherine." "I can't," Katherine said, louder now, a note of panic entering her voice. "Please don't make me do this." The mood on the boat shifted, the smiles becoming fixed, eyes hardening. I could feel the collective judgment bearing down on my daughter. "Now, Katherine," Gerald said, his voice losing its jovial tone, "everyone participates. No exceptions." "I'll go with her," I said firmly. "We'll swim together." Gerald shook his head. "That's not how it works. This is something each new Morgan must do alone." What happened next occurred so quickly I barely had time to react. Elizabeth moved to Catherine's right side, Andrew to her left. Michael stepped back, his face impassive. With a nod from Gerald, Elizabeth and Andrew grabbed Katherine by the arms and legs. 1, 2, 3, they counted in unison, and before I could do more than cry out, they had swung Katherine over the side of the boat and released her into the deep water. Katherine hit the water with a splash and immediately began to panic. Her arms flailed wildly, her head bobbing under and back up as she gasped and screamed. "Help! I can't swim! Help me!" I moved to dive in after her, but felt strong hands restraining me. Gerald had grabbed me from behind. "This is part of the process," he said calmly in my ear. "She has to do it herself." "She's drowning!" I screamed, struggling against his grip. Around us, the Morgan family watched, some laughing, others merely observing with clinical interest, as if Catherine's terror was a mildly interesting science experiment. Michael stood at the railing, watching his wife thrash in the water. "Just calm down and swim, Katherine," he called, sounding annoyed rather than concerned. "It's not that deep." With a strength born of desperation, I broke free of Gerald's hold and dove into the lake. The cold water shocked my system, but I swam with determined strokes toward my daughter, who was now coughing and spluttering, clearly swallowing water as she struggled. I reached Katherine just as she was going under again, grabbing her around the waist and pulling her head above water. "I've got you," I gasped. "I've got you, sweetheart. Float on your back." Together, we made it back to the boat, where reluctant hands finally helped pull us aboard. Katherine collapsed on the deck, shaking uncontrollably, water streaming from her hair and clothes. I knelt beside her, wrapping a towel around her shoulders, my own body trembling with cold and rage. The Morgans stood around us, some looking uncomfortable now, but others, including Victoria and Elizabeth, seemed almost disappointed. "Well, that was dramatic," Victoria said with a sniff. "Really, Katherine, it was just a bit of fun. Everyone else managed it." "Just a joke," Andrew added. "Building character." Michael crouched beside Katherine, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and annoyance. "You should have just learned to swim, like I told you to," he said quietly. "Now you've made a scene in front of everyone." I looked at my son-in-law with pure disgust. They could have killed her. She told you all she couldn't swim. She told you about her phobia, and you did this anyway. Michael's face hardened. "This is a family matter, Mrs. Bennet. You wouldn't understand our traditions." The boat ride back to shore was silent and tense. Katherine huddled against me, shivering despite the warm air and towels. I could feel the rage building inside me, a mother's fury unlike anything I'd experienced before. These people had deliberately put my child in danger for their amusement, for some twisted sense of tradition and belonging. And my daughter's own husband had not only allowed it, but participated. As soon as we docked, Katherine stumbled off the boat and ran toward the house, ignoring Michael's calls to stop being so dramatic. I followed close behind, my mind racing with plans to get her away from these horrible people as quickly as possible. I watched the family dispersing on the dock behind us, their laughter and casual conversation resuming as if nothing unusual had happened, as if they hadn't just revealed themselves to be monsters wearing human skin. And in that moment, I knew that the Morgans had made a terrible mistake. They had shown their true faces to the wrong people. They had hurt my daughter, and they were going to regret it. If you've ever had to protect someone you love from toxic people who just don't understand boundaries, give this video a like. And if you're wondering what happens when these entitled Morgans finally get what's coming to them, make sure you keep watching. Trust me, you won't want to miss what my brother had in store for them. Back at the house, Katherine locked herself in our bathroom, the sound of her sobbing audible through the door. I knocked gently, calling her name, but she wouldn't respond except to say, "Please, Mom, just give me a few minutes." I changed out of my wet clothes quickly, then went downstairs, fury propelling me forward. I found the Morgan family gathered in the spacious living room, drinks already in hand, laughing and chatting as if they hadn't just traumatized my daughter. "How dare you?" I said, my voice cutting through their conversation. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to me. "You knew about Katherine's phobia. You knew she was terrified, and you threw her in anyway." Victoria sighed dramatically. "Eleanor, you're making far too much of a simple family tradition. Everyone goes through it. It builds character," Gerald added, swirling the ice in his scotch. "Katherine needs to toughen up if she's going to be a Morgan." "It was just a harmless prank," Elizabeth said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "She's fine, isn't she?" "Fine?" I repeated incredulously. "She's traumatized. She's upstairs having a panic attack because her husband's family, people who are supposed to care about her, deliberately pushed her into a situation they knew would terrify her. For what? For your amusement? To test her?" "Mrs. Bennet," Gerald said, his voice taking on a warning tone, "I understand you're upset, but this is how our family operates." Katherine knew what she was marrying into. Michael had been silent until now, standing slightly apart from his family. "I'll go check on her," he said, moving toward the stairs. "No," I said firmly. "You've done enough. What kind of man stands by while his family abuses his wife?" Michael's face flushed with anger. "You don't understand our ways. Katherine is my wife, and this is between us and my family. With all due respect, you're just a guest here." "Michael," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "if you care about Katherine at all, you'll stand up for her right now. You'll tell your family that what they did was wrong, and you'll never allow it to happen again." A moment of tension hung in the air as Michael looked between me and his family. Then he moved to stand beside his father. "Katherine will be fine," he said coldly. "She's just overreacting, as usual. Once she calms down, she'll understand this was for her own good." Victoria smiled thinly. "You see, Eleanor? Michael understands how we do things. Perhaps you should consider returning home if our family dynamic disturbs you so much. Katherine will stay, of course." Gerald nodded. "I think that would be best. We appreciate your visit, but it's clear you don't quite fit with the Morgan way." "Katherine isn't staying anywhere," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We're both leaving today." Gerald's expression darkened. "I don't think you understand your place here, Eleanor. Katherine is a Morgan now. She belongs with her husband and his family. We've dealt with interference before, and it never ends well for those who try to come between us." The threat was unmistakable. I was about to respond when the doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the tense silence of the room. The housekeeper appeared moments later, followed by my brother Robert. He looked just as I remembered, tall, distinguished, with silver hair and the bearing of a man used to commanding respect. He wore casual clothes, khakis, and a button-down shirt, but somehow still managed to look authoritative. "Ellie," he said, giving me a brief hug before turning to survey the room. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Gerald stepped forward, his demeanor shifting subtly as he recognized my brother. "Judge Bennet," he said, extending his hand. "What an unexpected pleasure. I didn't realize you were joining us." Robert shook his hand briefly. "Gerald Morgan, it's been some time. Trial of United States versus Westbrook Capital, if I recall. Your company was a major investor." Gerald's smile faltered slightly. "You have an excellent memory." "I do," Robert agreed, his tone pleasant but his eyes sharp, "particularly when it comes to family matters. I understand there's been an incident involving my niece." Victoria stepped forward, social grace reasserting itself. "Just a small misunderstanding during a family tradition. Nothing to concern yourself with, Judge Bennet." "I see," Robert said. "And where is Katherine now?" "Upstairs," I told him. "She's very upset." Robert nodded. "I'd like to speak with her, if I may." Michael moved forward. With all due respect, sir, this is a private family matter between Katherine and myself. Robert turned to him, his expression unchanged but something hardening in his eyes. And with all due respect, Mr. Morgan, I'm family too. Katherine's family. I'd like to see her. Without waiting for a response, Robert followed me upstairs. Katherine had finally emerged from the bathroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, her face tear-streaked and pale. When she saw Robert, fresh tears welled in her eyes. "Uncle Robert," she said, her voice breaking. They pushed me in the lake. They knew I couldn't swim. They knew I was terrified, and they did it anyway. And Michael. He just stood there. He let them do it. Robert sat beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Tell me everything, Katie," he said, using his old nickname for her. And she did. Not just about the lake incident, but about the past 3 years of her marriage. The isolation from friends and family. The financial control. The emotional manipulation. The gradual erosion of her confidence and independence. The Morgan family's cruelty disguised as traditions and jokes. As she spoke, I watched Robert's expression. To anyone else, he might have seemed calm, but I knew my brother. I could see the controlled fury building behind his eyes, in the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers tensed against his knee. When Katherine finished, Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I think it's time for you both to leave this house. Today, now." "Michael won't let me go easily," Katherine said, fear evident in her voice. "The Morgans, they have ways of making people's lives difficult." "The Morgans," Robert said calmly, "have made a significant error in judgment. Let me handle this." We packed quickly, gathering our belongings while Robert waited. When we returned downstairs, the entire Morgan family was assembled in the foyer, Michael at the front. "Katherine," Michael said, his voice softening in what I now recognized as a manipulative tactic, "don't do this. You're upset, I understand that. But running away won't solve anything. We can talk about this, just the two of us." Robert stepped forward. "I'm afraid Katherine will be coming with us today, Mr. Morgan. I've already arranged for a car to take us to the airport." Michael's expression hardened. "This is between me and my wife, Judge Bennett. With all due respect, you have no authority here." "Perhaps not legal authority in this specific instance," Robert conceded, "but I do have something the Morgans seem to value above all else: influence. And I will not hesitate to use every ounce of that influence if any of you attempt to prevent Katherine from leaving, or if you cause her any further distress." Gerald moved to stand beside his son. "Are you threatening us, Judge?" Robert smiled slightly. "Not at all. I'm simply stating facts. Katherine is leaving with us today. She will contact you when she's ready to discuss the future of your relationship, Michael. Until then, I suggest you all reflect on your behavior today." As we moved toward the door, Robert paused beside Gerald, speaking quietly but clearly enough that I could hear. "You have no idea what you've just done." The drive away from the lake house was silent at first. Katherine sat in the back seat, staring out the window, occasional tears sliding down her cheeks. Once we were well clear of the Morgan property, Robert pulled over at a scenic overlook, turning to face us both. "Katherine," he said gently, "I want you to know that you're safe now. Whatever happens next, whatever you decide to do about Michael, you have people who love you and will support you." Katherine broke down then, sobbing as if something had broken loose inside her. "I've been so scared," she confessed through her tears. "For so long, I didn't know how to get out. I thought maybe it was me, that I wasn't trying hard enough to fit in with them." "It was never you," I told her, reaching back to take her hand. "Never." Robert's face was grimly determined. "The Morgans have been playing by their own rules for too long," he said. "That ends now. I promise you, Katherine, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." As we continued our journey home, I felt a strange mixture of emotions: relief that Katherine was away from that toxic environment, rage at what the Morgans had done to her, and a growing anticipation of what was to come. Because I knew my brother Robert, and when he made a promise, he kept it. The Morgans might think they were untouchable, protected by their wealth and social standing, but they were about to learn a painful lesson about the consequences of their actions. The 2-hour drive to Robert's house in the Boston suburbs gave Katherine time to open up further about her marriage. As we wound through the New Hampshire countryside, she shared details that made my heart ache as a mother. Michael's constant criticism, always delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes. The subtle way he had isolated her from friends and colleagues. The control over their finances, leaving Katherine, a successful lawyer, with an allowance like a child. I kept thinking it would get better, she said, her voice hollow. That once we were married longer, once I proved myself to his family, things would change. But they just got worse. By the time we reached Robert's elegant colonial home, Katherine was exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. She fell asleep almost immediately in the guest room, while Robert and I sat in his study, a fire crackling despite the summer evening, 2 glasses of whiskey between us. How did I not see this? I asked him, the guilt overwhelming me. My own daughter, suffering for years, and I had no idea how bad it was. Robert shook his head. Abusers like the Morgans are expert manipulators, Ellie. They present one face to the world and another behind closed doors. You saw the warning signs and acted on them. Many parents wouldn't have. What do we do now? I asked. Robert took a thoughtful sip of his whiskey. First, Katherine needs time to heal, to remember who she was before Michael Morgan got his hooks into her. As for the Morgans, he paused, his expression hardening. I believe in fighting fire with firepower. Over the next few days, Katherine began to emerge from the fog of her marriage. She called her office, taking a leave of absence. She spoke with a therapist Robert recommended, someone who specialized in emotional abuse. And she began to share more details about the Morgan family dynamics. The picture that emerged was disturbing. The Morgans operated like a cult, with Gerald and Victoria as the unquestioned leaders. Loyalty to the family was paramount, with any deviation punished swiftly and severely. Those who married in were expected to submit completely to the Morgan way, abandoning their own identities, friends, and even families of origin. Michael's phone calls and texts came in a predictable pattern, alternating between threats. You have no idea what my family can do to you. Please, baby, I love you, we can work this out. And attempts to make Katherine question her own perceptions. You're being hysterical. It was just a harmless tradition. Robert, meanwhile, was making calls of his own. 5 days after we left the lake house, he invited an old friend to dinner, Jack Reeves, a former FBI agent turned private investigator. The Morgans have a reputation in certain circles, Jack told us over coffee after dinner, Katherine having gone to bed early. Old money, powerful connections, ruthless in business and personal matters. But they've been careful, kept their darker dealings just this side of legal. Until now, Robert said. Jack nodded. I've started digging. Nothing invasive yet, just public records, news archives, court documents. But already I'm seeing patterns. 3 previous spouses who left Morgan marriages, 2, all systematically destroyed professionally and personally afterward. Rumors of tax evasion in the family businesses, questionable dealings with foreign investors that skirted sanctions laws. Can any of it be proven? I asked. Jack smiled slightly. With the right resources and motivation? Absolutely. Robert turned to me. Katherine needs to decide what she wants to do about her marriage. But regardless of that decision, the Morgans need to understand that they can't treat people the way they treated her. They can't be allowed to continue destroying lives without consequences. Over the next 2 weeks, Jack's investigation deepened, bringing to light the true extent of the Morgan family's corruption and cruelty. Gerald Morgan's investment firm had been engaged in creative accounting practices for decades, hiding profits in offshore accounts to avoid taxes. Victoria had a secret prescription drug problem, using multiple doctors to obtain opioids, a felony in most states. Michael's brother Andrew had paid off at least 3 women to keep sexual harassment claims quiet, using family money and intimidation tactics to ensure their silence. Most disturbing was the pattern of what happened to those who crossed the family. Ex-spouses who sought fair divorce settlements found themselves blacklisted in their industries. Former business partners who claimed their fair share saw their reputations destroyed by whisper campaigns and manufactured scandals. The Morgans had constructed an intricate web of influence and intimidation that had protected them for generations. When Jack shared his findings with Katherine, I watched my daughter's face transform from shock to horror to a slow-burning anger. They did this to other people too? She asked, looking through the files. The traditions? The tests? Jack nodded. The Morgan family loyalty test appears to go back at least 3 generations, always targeting new family members, particularly spouses, always involving some form of humiliation or exploitation of known fears. There are at least 7 documented incidents similar to what happened to you at the lake. Katherine was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked up, a determination in her eyes I hadn't seen since before her marriage. "I want a divorce," she said firmly, "and I want them to never be able to do this to anyone else again." Robert nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "I was hoping you'd say that. Jack and I have been discussing options. We can pursue this through entirely legal channels. Divorce proceedings, tax investigations, reporting Victoria's prescription fraud. Nothing illegal, nothing underhanded. Just the law, applied fairly and thoroughly." "But won't they use their influence to make all that go away?" I asked. "They'll try," Robert acknowledged, "but they've never gone up against someone with equal or greater influence who was willing to use it. They've picked on people they could easily overpower, until now." Katherine's transformation over the next few days was remarkable. Each new revelation about the Morgans seemed to strengthen her resolve, to help her reclaim pieces of herself that Michael had systematically stripped away. She began making calls to colleagues, reconnecting with old friends. She contacted a banker friend who helped her set up new accounts in her name only. She even called her office, discussing her return from leave. Michael's calls grew more frequent and more desperate as he realized Katherine wasn't coming back on his terms. "They're going to destroy you," he warned in one voicemail. "You have no idea what you're doing, Katherine. No one leaves the Morgan family like this. No one." But Katherine wasn't afraid anymore. "Let them try," she said after listening to the message. "I'm not alone, and I'm not powerless. Not anymore." As Jack's investigation continued, Katherine made a decision that surprised even me. "I don't want revenge," she told us one evening. "I want justice. Not just for me, but for everyone they've hurt. I want them exposed for what they are, and I want it done legally, publicly, and permanently." Robert nodded approvingly. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." The conference room at Harrington, Wythe and Associates, one of Boston's most prestigious law firms, was imposing by design. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, while the gleaming mahogany table could seat 20. Today it held just 5 people: Katherine, Robert, myself, Jack Reeves, and Diana Harrington, the firm's formidable founding partner. Diana was an old friend of Robert's from law school, and her reputation as a divorce attorney was legendary. She had represented clients in some of the highest-profile, highest-asset divorces in New England, and she rarely lost. "Let me be clear," Diana said, reviewing the files spread before her. "Based on what you've told me and the evidence Mr. Reeves has gathered, we have grounds for not just a divorce, but a very favorable settlement for Katherine. Financial control, emotional abuse, the incident at the lake, these all strengthen our position considerably." Katherine nodded. "I don't want to take Michael for everything he has. I just want what's fair, and I want to be free of him and his family." "Understanding," Diana said, "but in my experience, the Morgans won't see it that way. They'll view any attempt to leave the family as a declaration of war. We need to be prepared for them to fight dirty." Robert leaned forward. "That's why we've developed a multi-pronged approach. Diana will handle the divorce proceedings, while I'll coordinate with federal contacts regarding the more serious issues Jack has uncovered." The plan was comprehensive. Katherine would file for divorce and request a temporary restraining order, given Michael's increasingly erratic behavior. Simultaneously, an anonymous tip would be sent to the IRS regarding Gerald Morgan's questionable tax practices. Diana would ensure that all evidence of Michael's financial control and emotional abuse was thoroughly documented for the court. "The key," Diana emphasized, "is that we need to move quickly and decisively. Once the Morgans realize what's happening, they'll mobilize their considerable resources to fight back." Katherine took a deep breath. "I'm ready." The response from the Morgans came swiftly, just as Diana had predicted. Within days of Katherine filing for divorce, Michael's attorney, a cold-eyed man from a firm known for its aggressive tactics, filed counter-motions alleging that Katherine was mentally unstable, that she had abandoned the marriage without cause, that she was unfit to manage her own affairs. Gerald Morgan made calls to judicial friends, attempting to have the case assigned to a sympathetic judge. Victoria began a whisper campaign in their social circles, suggesting that Katherine had substance abuse issues, that she'd been unfaithful, that she was pursuing the divorce for financial gain. What they didn't anticipate was Robert's quiet influence. The case was assigned to Judge Maria Santos, a former colleague of Robert's known for her scrupulous fairness and immunity to outside pressure. The attempts to smear Katherine's reputation fell flat when confronted with her sterling professional record and the testimony of colleagues who had witnessed Michael's controlling behavior firsthand. But the Morgans weren't done. Victoria showed up at my home one afternoon, immaculately dressed and smiling like we were old friends. "Eleanor," she said when I answered the door, "I think it's time we had a chat, woman to woman." I reluctantly invited her in, curious about what she might say. "This has all gotten out of hand," she began, perched on the edge of my sofa like she was afraid of contamination. "A simple misunderstanding at the lake, and now lawyers and courts, and all this unpleasantness." "A misunderstanding?" I repeated incredulously. "You pushed my daughter into deep water knowing she couldn't swim. That's not a misunderstanding, Victoria. That's cruelty." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Dramatics. Katherine needs to develop a thicker skin if she's going to be part of our family. And she is part of our family, whether you like it or not. This divorce nonsense is just a phase, a temper tantrum. Michael is prepared to forgive her, to welcome her back. Katherine doesn't need forgiveness," I said firmly. "She needs freedom from your toxic family." Victoria's pleasant mask slipped, revealing the cold calculation beneath. "Let me be very clear, Eleanor. The Morgans protect their own. Katherine can come back, and all will be forgiven. Or she can continue this foolishness, and she will regret it for the rest of her life. We have ways of making sure of that, and not just her, you, your brother, anyone who helps her." I stood up. "I think it's time for you to leave, Victoria." "Think about what I've said," she replied, gathering her designer purse. "Family is forever, Eleanor. Make sure Katherine understands that before it's too late." I reported the visit to Robert immediately, who added it to the growing documentation of the Morgans' intimidation tactics. Michael, meanwhile, began a campaign to discredit Katherine professionally. He contacted partners at her firm, suggesting she was emotionally unstable. He reached out to clients, implying she was no longer capable of handling their cases. He even tried to access her work email, though the firm's IT security prevented it. Through it all, Robert remained calm, methodical, documenting every attempt at intimidation, every smear campaign, every underhanded tactic. Diana used these in court, building an increasingly strong case that the Morgans were engaged in a coordinated effort to punish Katherine for leaving. The IRS audit of Morgan Financial Holdings, triggered by an anonymous tip, courtesy of Jack Reeves, began to uncover discrepancies that couldn't be easily explained away. Gerald's attempts to use political connections to quash the investigation found unexpected resistance, many of his usual allies, suddenly becoming unavailable or unwilling to intervene. The discovery phase of the divorce proceedings revealed even more damaging information. Financial records showed how completely Michael had controlled their money, giving Katherine access to only a small portion of her own income. Text messages and emails documented his emotional manipulation and gaslighting. Testimony from the household staff at the lake house confirmed the events of that day, several admitting they had witnessed similar traditions inflicted on other family members who had married in. Perhaps most significantly, Katherine connected with others who had left Morgan marriages, 2 women and 1 man who had been systematically destroyed by the family afterward. Their stories were remarkably similar to hers: the isolation, the control, the traditions that were really just formalized abuse. With Robert's encouragement and Diana's legal support, they agreed to testify about their experiences. The Morgan family began to fracture under the pressure. Michael's siblings turned on him, blaming him for bringing this scrutiny upon the family. Gerald and Victoria argued publicly at a charity function, their perfect facade crumbling. Business associates began to distance themselves, unwilling to be caught in the fallout of what was becoming a very public scandal. Through it all, Katherine grew stronger. The frightened, diminished woman who had emerged from the lake house was gone, replaced by the confident, intelligent woman I had raised. She returned to work part-time, reconnected with old friends, even started taking swimming lessons to conquer her old fear. "It's not about revenge," she told me one evening as we sat in Robert's garden. It's about making sure they can never do this to anyone else. It's about truth. Robert joined us, carrying a tray with coffee. The Morgan Empire is built on lies and intimidation, he said. Remove those foundations, and the whole thing comes crashing down. Are you sure this is the right approach? I asked, still concerned about the Morgans' power and influence, going directly against them so publicly. Robert smiled slightly. The Morgans have spent generations cultivating a certain image, a certain reputation. They've hidden their true nature behind closed doors, behind money and social standing. All we're doing is pulling back the curtain, letting the world see what's really there. The truth is our greatest weapon, and their greatest weakness. As the court date for the divorce proceedings approached, the Morgans made one last, desperate attempt to silence Katherine. Michael offered a generous private settlement, with one condition: Katherine would sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising never to speak about her marriage or the Morgan family. Katherine didn't even consider it. They want me to be quiet to protect their reputation, she told Diana. But their reputation is a lie, and I won't help them maintain it. The stage was set for a courtroom confrontation that would change everything, not just for Katherine and Michael, but for the entire Morgan dynasty. The truth was about to come to light, and none of us could predict exactly how it would unfold. The Suffolk County Courthouse in downtown Boston was imposing by design, its granite facade and towering columns intended to inspire respect for the law. Inside courtroom 3 amperes, that respect was being put to the test as the divorce proceedings of Morgan v. Morgan began in earnest. The Morgan family arrived en masse, a show of solidarity and power. Gerald and Victoria, Michael and his siblings, aunts and uncles and cousins, all dressed impeccably, all wearing expressions of wounded dignity, as if they were the victims in this scenario. They filled the right side of the courtroom, a wall of old money and entitlement. Our side was smaller but no less formidable. Katherine sat between Diana and her associate, calm and composed in a simple navy suit. Robert, Jack Reeves, and I occupied the row directly behind them. A few rows back sat 3 people I'd only recently met: Thomas Barrett, Sophia Chen, and Melissa Donovan, all former spouses of Morgan family members, all destroyed by the family after leaving. They had agreed to testify about the pattern of abuse and retaliation, despite their fear of the Morgans. Judge Maria Santos entered, and the proceedings began. Opening statements established the battle lines clearly. Diana described a pattern of control, isolation, and emotional abuse, culminating in the incident at the lake. Michael's attorney portrayed Katherine as unstable, ungrateful, and vindictive, seeking to damage a respected family out of spite. Katherine was the first to testify. She took the stand with quiet dignity, her voice steady as she recounted the gradual erosion of her independence, the subtle ways Michael had separated her from friends and family, the financial control that left her dependent despite her own successful career. It happened so gradually that I didn't see it clearly until I was trapped, she explained. Each individual action seemed explainable, forgivable. It was only when I stepped back that I could see the pattern. When she described the incident at the lake, her voice faltered briefly, but she continued, detailing not just what had happened but how the entire Morgan family had treated it as normal, acceptable behavior. They laughed while I was drowning, she said simply. My husband stood by and watched. Michael's attorney's cross-examination was aggressive, designed to rattle her. He suggested she was exaggerating for financial gain, that she had mental health issues, that she had always been jealous of the Morgan family's wealth and status. Katherine remained unshaken. I earned my own money. I had my own career. I didn't need the Morgan fortune. What I needed was respect and basic human decency, which I never received from that family. I took the stand next, describing what I had witnessed at the lake house. The subtle put-downs and exclusion, the controlling behavior, and most dramatically, the moment when they pushed Katherine into the water despite knowing her phobia. They restrained me while my daughter was drowning, I testified. Gerald Morgan physically held me back, telling me it was part of the process. They were willing to let her drown to preserve their twisted family tradition. Other witnesses followed. Katherine's colleagues testified about the changes they'd observed in her after her marriage, how she'd become withdrawn, anxious, constantly checking her phone. Her therapist, with Katherine's permission, testified about the symptoms of emotional abuse she'd observed. Then came the former Morgan spouses. One by one, they described experiences eerily similar to Katherine's: the isolation, the control, the traditions that humiliated and traumatized, and finally, the campaign of destruction when they tried to leave. They blacklisted me in my industry, Thomas Barrett testified. Clients who had worked with me for years suddenly dropped me. False rumors about substance abuse and embezzlement followed me everywhere. I had to move to another state and change careers. Sophia Chen described how Victoria Morgan had personally called her parents in China, telling lies that had nearly destroyed her relationship with her family. Melissa Donovan recounted how the Morgans had pressured her landlord to evict her, her bank to close her accounts, all while Gerald Morgan offered to make it all go away if she would sign a non-disclosure agreement. The pattern was clear and damning. The Morgans didn't just abuse those who married into the family, they systematically destroyed anyone who tried to leave. When Michael took the stand, his carefully cultivated charm was on full display. He spoke of his deep love for Katherine, his confusion over her sudden decision to leave, his willingness to work on their marriage. The lake incident was unfortunate, he conceded. But it was a tradition, not abuse. Everyone in the family goes through it. It's meant to build character, to prove you're one of us. Under Diana's cross-examination, however, his facade began to crack. She methodically walked him through the financial records, showing his control of Katherine's income, the text messages revealing his manipulative tactics, the testimony of witnesses who had seen his behavior firsthand. "Mr. Morgan," Diana said, her voice deceptively gentle, "is it your testimony that isolating your wife from her family and friends, controlling her finances, and deliberately exploiting her phobia for your family's amusement constitutes a loving marriage?" Michael's composure slipped. "You don't understand how our family works," he snapped. "We have standards, expectations." Katherine knew what she was marrying into. "Did she?" Diana pressed. "Did you tell her before the wedding that she would be subjected to psychological abuse, financial control, and a tradition that exploited her greatest fear?" Michael's face flushed with anger. "She should have learned to swim," he said, the words escaping before he could stop them. A real Morgan would have faced her fears instead of running away. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Diana allowed a moment of silence, letting Michael's words hang in the air. "No further questions, Your Honor." Victoria Morgan's testimony was equally damaging. Attempting to defend the family's behavior, she instead revealed the disturbing belief system behind it. "The Morgan family has a certain position to maintain," she testified haughtily. "Not everyone is suited to our way of life. These tests help us determine who has the strength of character to be one of us." "And if they fail your test?" Diana asked. Victoria shrugged elegantly. "Then they don't belong, do they? Even if the test involves putting someone in physical danger?" "We would never allow actual harm," Victoria insisted, though her eyes slid away from Diana's direct gaze. Katherine was in no real danger. She was simply too sensitive, too emotional for our family. Throughout the proceedings, Gerald Morgan grew increasingly agitated. Several times, he was observed passing notes to his attorney or whispering urgently to various family members. During a brief recess, I overheard him on the phone, his voice low but intense. "Handle it. I don't care what it costs. This needs to go away. Now." Robert noticed too. "He's trying to exert influence behind the scenes," he murmured to me. "Calling in favors, making threats, offering bribes. He doesn't realize those tactics won't work this time." When court resumed, the tension in the room was palpable. Gerald took the stand with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference and control. He spoke of family traditions, of the importance of loyalty, of his disappointment in Katherine's misinterpretation of events. "The Morgans have maintained our position through strength and unity," he testified. "Each generation must prove itself worthy of the Morgan name. Katherine failed that test." Diana's cross-examination was surgical. "Mr. Morgan, would you say your family values appearance above all else?" Gerald frowned. "We value strength, loyalty, and tradition, even when that tradition involves cruelty, even when loyalty means enabling abuse." "You're twisting my words," Gerald said, his voice rising slightly. "Katherine is attempting to destroy our family's reputation for her own gain." "Is she?" Diana asked, signaling to her assistant, who handed her a folder. "Mr. Morgan, are you aware that the IRS is currently conducting an audit of your family businesses?" Gerald's face paled slightly. That's completely unrelated to these proceedings. Perhaps, Diana conceded. But isn't it true that your concern about your family's reputation extends to covering up potentially criminal financial activities? Michael's attorney shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This line of questioning is irrelevant and prejudicial. Your Honor, Diana countered smoothly, I'm establishing a pattern of behavior within the Morgan family, specifically, their willingness to go to extraordinary lengths to maintain a public image that conceals their true actions. Judge Santos considered for a moment. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Counselor. Diana nodded, turning back to Gerald. Mr. Morgan, would you say that truth is important to you? Of course, he replied stiffly. Then how do you explain these? Diana handed him a stack of documents, emails, financial records, transcripts of phone calls, all meticulously gathered by Jack Reeves and vetted by Robert. These show a pattern of intimidation against not just Katherine, but everyone who has ever left your family. Blacklisting, smear campaigns, financial sabotage, all directed by you personally. Gerald's face flushed, dark red. Where did you get these? He demanded, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. They were legally obtained, I assure you, Diana said calmly. And they're all admissible as evidence. As Diana continued her questioning, Gerald's composure crumbled further. He began to sweat visibly, his answers becoming defensive, contradictory. When Diana presented evidence of his attempts to influence the judge originally assigned to the case, he actually shouted at her, pounding his fist on the witness stand. You have no right, he bellowed. Do you know who I am? Who we are? Yes, Mr. Morgan, Diana replied quietly. I believe we all do now. Judge Santos called for order, but the damage was done. Gerald's outburst, captured by the courtroom sketch artists and described in detail by reporters present, would become front-page news the following day. The final blow came unexpectedly. As Gerald was stepping down from the witness stand, still visibly shaken, the courtroom doors opened and 3 men in suits entered, approaching the judge with official-looking documents. Your Honor, one of them said, I'm Special Agent Daniels with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We have subpoenas for Gerald Morgan, Victoria Morgan, and Andrew Morgan regarding an ongoing investigation into tax evasion, wire fraud, and witness intimidation. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Victoria gasped audibly. Andrew went pale. Michael stared at his father in horror. Gerald clutched his chest suddenly, staggering slightly before collapsing into his chair. Medical emergency, someone called, and the judge quickly called a recess as paramedics were summoned. In the hallway outside, Katherine stood beside me, watching as Gerald was taken out on a stretcher, oxygen mask over his face, Victoria following, for once without her perfect composure. Did you know this was going to happen? I asked Robert, who had appeared beside us. He shook his head. I knew there was an investigation, but not that they would serve subpoenas today. The timing is fortuitous. When court resumed the following day, the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Half the Morgan family seats were empty. Gerald remained hospitalized for observation after what was diagnosed as a stress-induced cardiac event. Victoria and Andrew were meeting with criminal attorneys. The family's wall of solidarity had crumbled overnight. Judge Santos, after reviewing all the evidence and testimony, ruled entirely in Katherine's favor. The divorce was granted on grounds of emotional abuse. Katherine was awarded a substantial financial settlement, reflecting not just her contributions to the marriage, but the damage inflicted by Michael's control and the Morgan family's actions. Protection orders were issued against Michael, Gerald, and Victoria, prohibiting any contact with Katherine. In her closing remarks, Judge Santos was scathing in her assessment of the Morgans. This court has seen abundant evidence of a family culture that enables and encourages abusive behavior under the guise of tradition, she said. Mr. Morgan and his family have displayed a disturbing pattern of control, manipulation, and retaliation that this court cannot condone. As we prepared to leave the courtroom, Michael approached Katherine, ignoring the warnings from his attorney. Katherine, he said, his voice breaking slightly, please, we can fix this. I'll change. We can start over, away from my family if that's what you want. Katherine looked at him for a long moment, her expression calm and clear. There's nothing to fix, Michael, she said quietly. It's over. I hope someday you understand what your family has done, not just to me, but to everyone they've hurt." She turned away from him, head high, walking out of the courtroom flanked by Robert and me. Behind us, the Morgan family exodus was a stark contrast. Michael standing alone as his relatives hurried out, faces averted from the press waiting outside, a once mighty dynasty now in shambles. As we emerged into the bright Boston sunshine, Katherine took a deep breath, as if filling her lungs with freedom for the first time in years. "It's really over, isn't it?" she asked, looking between Robert and me. "Yes," I said, squeezing her hand. "It's over. And you won." Robert smiled slightly. "Justice," he corrected gently. "Not winning. Justice." I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of the Morgan family's downfall. The federal investigation would continue, unearthing decades of financial crimes. The public scandal would destroy their carefully cultivated social standing. And Katherine's courage in standing up to them would inspire others to come forward with their own stories of Morgan family abuse, creating a reckoning that was long overdue. If you've been following this intense family story all the way through, I know your emotions must be running high right now. Justice was finally served, but at what cost? Take a moment to hit that like button if you believe that family should lift you up, not tear you down. And if you're wondering how Katherine rebuilt her life after escaping this toxic marriage, the final chapter of our story is coming up next. Trust me, seeing how we all healed from this trauma is worth staying until the end. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Katherine stood on the balcony of her new apartment in Back Bay, Boston, watching the sunset over the Charles River. I'd come to help her arrange the last of her furniture, a housewarming of sorts, though she'd been living there for nearly a month already. "It's perfect," I told her, joining her at the railing. "Absolutely perfect for you." She smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression I had feared I might never see again. "It feels like mine," she said simply. "Every piece of furniture, every color on the wall, I chose it all myself." The significance of that statement wasn't lost on me. After years of Michael dictating every aspect of their home, down to the brand of soap in the bathrooms, this space was entirely Katherine's creation. Modern but warm, with splashes of vibrant color and walls lined with books, it reflected her personality in a way the stark, showroom-perfect Morgan household never had. The changes in Katherine over those 6 months had been remarkable to witness. She had returned to her environmental law practice full-time, taking on high-profile cases she might have shied away from during her marriage. Her confidence had returned, along with her quick wit and ready laugh. She had reconnected with old friends, made new ones, and even started taking weekend hiking trips, something Michael had always discouraged as too rustic for a Morgan wife. The federal investigation into the Morgan family businesses continued to unfold, making headlines with each new revelation. Gerald had survived his cardiac episode, but stepped down as CEO of Morgan Financial, citing health concerns. The truth, that he was cooperating with federal investigators to save himself at the expense of several longtime associates, or became public knowledge when recordings of his testimony were leaked to the press. Victoria, facing her own legal troubles related to prescription fraud, had retreated to a wellness center in Arizona, though rumors suggested it was more rehabilitation than spa. The prestigious Morgan estate at Lake Winnipesaukee had been quietly put up for sale, its listing price reduced twice already, with no buyers in sight. Few wanted to be associated with the Morgan name anymore, not even for a prime piece of lakefront property. Katherine had been following the news with detached interest. "It's strange," she told me as we prepared dinner in her new kitchen that evening. "I thought I'd feel vindicated, even happy, watching their empire crumble, but mostly I just feel free. Like they don't have any power over me anymore, not even enough for me to enjoy their downfall." "That's healing," I told her, squeezing her shoulder gently. My own relationship with Robert had deepened through this ordeal. My brother had always been important to me, but seeing his unwavering support of Katherine, his quiet determination to see justice done, had strengthened our bond. We spoke almost daily now, had regular family dinners, and were planning a siblings-only trip to the coast for the following month. "Mom," Katherine said, looking up from the vegetables she was chopping, "I've been meaning to tell you. I've started taking swimming lessons." I nearly dropped the pot I was holding. "Swimming lessons? Really?" She nodded, a determined expression on her face. "I'm not letting that fear control me anymore. I found an instructor who specializes in adult aquaphobia. We started in the shallow end of a pool, just sitting on the steps. Now I can actually swim the length of the pool. Not gracefully, she added with a laugh, but I can do it. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. The evening news brought another update on the Morgan saga. Michael had filed for bankruptcy protection after being forced out of the family business. His siblings had turned against him, blaming him for bringing Katherine, and by extension, Robert and the subsequent legal scrutiny, into their lives. Katherine watched the report with a slight frown. He called me again yesterday, she said. Left another voicemail. He says he's changed, that he understands now what his family did was wrong. Do you believe him? I asked carefully. She considered the question. I believe he's sorry he got caught, sorry he lost everything. But real change? I don't think so. The Morgans spent generations building that toxic family culture. It doesn't disappear in 6 months, no matter how motivated he might be. She had refused all contact with Michael beyond what was legally necessary to finalize their divorce. The protection orders remained in place, though he had petitioned the court twice to have them removed, claiming he posed no threat to Katherine. Both requests had been denied. Over dessert, a homemade apple crumble that would have horrified Victoria's sensibilities about proper hostess desserts, Katherine shared more news. She had used a portion of her settlement money to establish a foundation providing legal support to victims of domestic abuse, particularly those facing well-resourced abusers. We've already helped 3 women stand up to wealthy, connected ex-partners, she told me with quiet pride. Women who might otherwise have been crushed by legal fees or intimidated into accepting unfair settlements. That's wonderful, Katherine, I said, genuinely moved by her desire to help others after her own trauma. It's what I needed to do, she said simply. Turn something ugly into something helpful. 2 weeks later, we gathered at a small lake in western Massachusetts. Katherine, Robert, myself, and a few close friends Katherine had reconnected with after her divorce. It was a beautiful autumn day, the trees around the lake ablaze with color, the water clear and still. Katherine stood at the end of a small dock, wearing a simple one-piece swimsuit, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked nervous but determined. You don't have to do this, I reminded her. The lessons are enough. This isn't a test you need to pass. She smiled. I know, Mom, but I want to. For me, not for anyone else. With a deep breath, she dove into the lake, surfacing a moment later with a triumphant splash. She swam a short distance, her strokes uneven but effective, before returning to the dock, where we all cheered her achievement. As she climbed out, wrapped herself in a towel, and accepted a mug of hot chocolate, her face glowed with something beyond the physical exertion, a profound sense of reclaimed power. That evening, as we sat around a small bonfire, Robert raised his glass in a toast. To Katherine, he said, who reminded us all what real strength looks like. And to family, Katherine added, raising her own glass. The real kind. Not those tied by obligation, but those bound by love. In the months that followed, the final chapters of the Morgan saga played out in courtrooms and headlines. Gerald pleaded guilty to multiple counts of tax evasion in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victoria filed for divorce, claiming she had been unaware of the family's financial crimes, a claim undermined by her own documented involvement in several questionable transactions. The once mighty Morgan dynasty, built on intimidation and secrets, collapsed under the weight of truth and accountability. Michael made one last attempt to reconcile with Katherine, sending a heartfelt letter expressing remorse and asking for a chance to apologize in person. Katherine read it carefully, then filed it away without responding. Some bridges can't be rebuilt, she told me when I asked about it, and that's okay. I don't need his apology to move on. And move on she did. Katherine's career flourished. Her foundation grew, helping more women escape abusive relationships. She even began dating again, cautiously, thoughtfully, a far cry from the whirlwind courtship Michael had swept her into. The man she was seeing now, a kind-eyed professor of environmental science she'd met at a conference, treated her with respect and genuine admiration for her mind and spirit. As for me, watching my daughter reclaim herself and her life has been the greatest joy of my later years. The fear and helplessness I felt that day at the lake have been replaced by profound gratitude for Robert's unwavering support, for Katherine's remarkable resilience, and for the justice that was ultimately served. The Morgans had built their dynasty on the belief that power and money could shield them from consequences, that they could hurt people with impunity. They never imagined that pushing my daughter into that lake would set in motion their own downfall. They never considered that the woman they tried to drown would not only survive but emerge stronger. And they certainly never knew my brother, a man whose quiet integrity proved more powerful than all their wealth and influence combined. In the end, the story of the Morgans isn't really about revenge. It's about justice, truth, and the healing that comes from standing up to those who would break us. It's about the family we choose, the strength we find in our darkest moments, and the peace that comes from living authentically, free from the cages others would build around us. Katherine's journey from victim to victor wasn't easy or quick. There were nightmares, therapy sessions, days when the weight of trauma felt overwhelming. But she persevered, one day at a time, reclaiming pieces of herself until she was whole again, not unchanged, but perhaps stronger at the broken places. As I look at her now, laughing and vibrant, planning a future entirely her own, I'm reminded of something my mother used to say: the truth will out. The Morgans spent generations hiding their true nature behind wealth and social standing, but in the end, the truth did come out, and in that truth, Katherine found her freedom. What's your story? Have you ever had to stand up to toxic family members or witnessed karma finally catching up to someone who deserved it? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. And if Katherine's journey of healing and reclaiming her power resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories about family, justice, and the strength we find in our darkest moments. Thank you for listening to my family's story. I hope it reminds you that no matter how powerful toxic people might seem, the truth is always stronger in the end.